Good news, kind of, is that we do know a bunch of reasons why it occurs, and unfortunately I'm not going to have time to go into some of the reasons that may interest you as forensic scientists. One of the reasons is to do with forensic science, but there are a bunch of others. The two that are most relevant to me, I don't know if you can see that red highlight, but I'm going to be focusing on a little bit more: false confessions and mistaken eyewitness identification, because they involve memory, and as a memory researcher, those are of the greatest interest and importance in some respects. So here I've put up some different studies that have looked at a mistaken eyewitness identification as a cause of wrongful conviction, and looked at how many cases have involved it. And it ranges depending on the set of cases that have been used, but all in all it looks like, hopefully you can see, quite a few. So there are different estimates, but the one thing that's the same throughout all of this research is that mistaken eyewitness identification is the number one reason why people, or the number one factor in wrongful conviction, which is why it's so important. So I'm going to just talk a bit about why eyewitnesses might make errors, and something I want to put out there at this point is that, as a memory psychologist and thinking about forensic evidence, memory needs to be thought of as forensic evidence as well. It's just as corruptible, just as vulnerable to contamination as other types of what you might think of as typical forensic evidence or physical evidence, and it can go wrong at a bunch of stages, and we need to be able to evaluate memory evidence in the same way as we might evaluate other evidence. So if you think of memory as a piece of evidence, like you might think of a hair or a DNA stain, the problems with memory start from the very beginning. So when somebody witnesses an event, and by witnessing I mean as a victim or as an eyewitness, a number of factors can influence the quality of the memory evidence from the very start. And I've put a bunch of them up here. I can't go through all of them, but on the left-hand side, a lot of factors to do with the circumstances under which the crime occurs, and on the right-hand side, various things to do with the witness or the victim themselves. So some things that seem quite obvious: the length of exposure that you're exposed to a perpetrator affects how good your memory is. The presence of a weapon, there's a lot of research on weapon focus. People tend to focus on a weapon rather than on a perpetrator if a weapon is present. Other group effects such as cross-race, people are not very good at recognising faces of other races as they are their own race, and so on and so forth. If you're thinking about evaluating evidence, as I've just suggested that we ought to do in this case, you might think, well, we can't control any of these factors because they arise as the situation arises. They arise, whoever's involved, we can't control that. But what I think is important to think about is, based on all these factors, is it a good or bad eyewitness in a particular case, and thinking about the quality of the evidence from the very beginning based on the factors, these kinds of factors. Unfortunately, it only goes on from there. I don't like to be the bearer of bad memory news, but that's not all good, unfortunately. There are some positives, which I'll get to. So after the events happened and various factors have led to a certain evidence of a certain quality, then comes a sort of a delay phase where various things can happen. So I want you to imagine this blue bubble is memory, somebody's memory, an eyewitness's memory. As time goes on, after the event occurs, memory starts to degrade. And this is no different from any other kind of memory. We forget stuff falls out of our heads. But thinking in a forensic evidence way, it's degrading, the evidence is degrading as time goes on. And various other things happen at the same time. You might be exposed to, the witness might be exposed to things like media reports, other witnesses to the event, law enforcement questioning. I put suggestive questioning. Any kind of questioning is still some sort of post-event information. And if it's correct information that you're exposed to, that may reinforce your memory and actually help with those gaps. If it's not correct information, that can have a detrimental effect, because being exposed to misinformation, as we call it in the literature, after the fact can actually insert new information into your memory such that you will be incorrect. And there's been years and years of research on misleading information. Excuse me, people can be misled on a range of different things, from seeing buildings and scenes that weren't there to colours of things, different objects moving around, and so on. And unfortunately, it's such a huge area, and I've just covered it in like 1 second, so I apologise to everybody for that. But if you're interested, please let me know.